So I'll start by explaining who I am, what I do, what this whole stream is about for people who are new, for people who have been here. Sorry, it's a review. Um, or if you're watching it later. I'm a college level drawing fundamentals instructor, and I also teach on the internet. And I like to do these free lectures for my Discord group um, because I like to show my teaching process, and hopefully this attracts some students. And even if not, it's fun and it gets other people like to show up for them too. They hopefully you guys have fun too. These are one-off lectures, so it's different from a course where the ideas of the lectures build upon each other and you like get assignments and then you come back the next week and get feedback. That's what would happen in a course, but these are one-offs so that if you haven't seen any of the other lectures, you'll still get just as much out of this. I won't be referring to anything from past lectures, at least not too much. At least not so much that you would not know what's going on. Um, all the information that I'm covering today is in my book that you can download for free. There should be a link in the description if you're on YouTube. If you're on Discord, actually, I know both of you. I know you've both been reading the book. And then what is new is that I have a free course that is covers drawing from observation, like the fundamentals of how to do that. And not just that, but it gives an example of effective study habits. So if you're a self-taught artist and you don't really know how to study, then this course will help you get those habits going in a way that you can apply to other subjects later on. So with that out of the way, let's talk about texture. To clarify what I mean by texture is today I want to talk about how to describe surface textures with your drawing. So I'll start by throwing it off to you guys. What are some challenges that you have faced or can envision facing when it comes to working with texture or trying to capture texture?
For me, it's always been like I guess just like drawing it, the ability to draw it.
Hmm. Yeah, so the ability to make the texture feel like real, like feel believable, would you
Yes,
say?
yeah, very real.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a pretty normal one, and we will cover that today. So let's let's get real specific here with physically what texture is and what do I mean by texture. So what texture is like smaller forms that are on the surface of larger forms, like the bumps that make up the roughness of a brick, or like fur on top of an animal would be a texture. It could also be where the form itself is made up of the smaller forms. So, like a bush is made up of leaves and twigs and stuff, but that bush can have like an overall form as well that's made up of the leaves and twigs. So we can describe textures the same way we describe any other form if they're big enough. So to make a quick version of this, there's a few ways I cover in my book for how to describe form. Um, the first is to describe its edges with lines. You can also use lines to wrap around the form. That reveals the orientation of the surfaces, so you can imagine where the surfaces are in space, which allows you to construct the form. Another way is with planes, and you use shapes for this. So these are areas of the form that have a similar orientation that are facing the same way. And the final way is with value, using value to model how light wraps around form. So because light will hit, the brightness, how bright or dark a surface is determined by its angle relative to the angle of the light, the direction that that light is coming from, then how bright or dark something is reveals its angle, and that angle, the angles of the surface reveal the form. So if the texture is big enough, we can use these strategies to draw the texture. So for example, if I zoom in on tree bark, I can use lines to describe the edges of the individual scales of the bark. I can use shapes to describe the planes of the individual scales of the bark. Or I could use value to show how light wraps around the scales of the bark. Make sense so far?
Yeah.
But a lot of the time with texture, you're not going to want to do that because that would be there's too many little forms for this to really work. Like in the example of the bark where you're like really close and you can break them down into individual bark scales, that makes sense, but a lot of the times you don't want to do that. So for example, say you're drawing a field of grass. Do you want to draw every blade of grass?
No.
No. So the example on the right is me trying to draw a field of grass by drawing every blade of grass. It doesn't look very good. I don't think it even looks that much like grass. Because we don't, when we see a field of grass, we don't look at every edge of every blade of grass. Instead, we understand that it's grass and we kind of fill in the texture in our mind. So the way I would represent that in a drawing is to show some of the blades of grass, like on the left, and let the viewer's mind fill in that the rest of those blades of grass are there. So even though I didn't draw all the blades and there's blank spots in between the blades, I'm guessing that you're still perceiving this as a field of grass. It's not that there's only a few blades with some blank space in between them. Is that accurate? Do you perceive this as being covered in grass?
The image of the left, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's what I mean. That you draw some of the forms and then you use those to let the viewer's mind fill in the rest. We're going to call these representative strategies because that's what we're going to be doing today for texture. We're going to represent some of the aspects of the texture and let the viewer fill in the rest. So representative forms is the most information for these, and this is where you represent entire forms of the texture, but you don't represent all the forms that are there in the texture. Maybe you do some of the bigger ones and then let the viewer's mind fill in the rest. So with this reptile, I drew the bigger scales. I drew the forms of the bigger scales with lines, but I didn't draw all of the scales. Yet I'm guessing that when you look at this, you still see him as covered in scales, even though you don't see all of them. A piece of housekeeping that I meant to mention earlier, but I forgot, is if at any point you have something to say, don't hesitate to interrupt me, because normally when I'm teaching, I can see people's like faces in real life, and I have a social cue on when other people want to talk and when I should stop. But I don't get those on the internet, so otherwise I have no idea if someone wants to speak. So if you have something to say, just go ahead and talk over me. If
All
you're
right.
just like that, exactly. Yeah?
So you're basically saying that less is more.
Yeah, yeah. To really summarize this to like one sentence, yeah, less is more. Um, Representing all of it with some of it. And just for the housekeeping again, if you don't want to use your mic or you're on YouTube, feel free to type it in the chat and I will read it out loud. So in the chat, it's a very nice picture you have there. What is it? Oh man, I drew this years ago. I don't remember what it is. It's some kind of reptile. I think it's an iguana. We'll go with that. Um, so sometimes you use representative forms because you literally can't draw all the forms, or like it would look terrible if you did, like the blades of grass. But sometimes it's an artistic decision. So, for example, if I'm drawing this brick wall, this like side of a house, I could draw every brick and every tile of the roof, and on its own that looks fine. I don't have a problem with that. If the point of my drawing is the wall and the roof, then I think that's fine. But if this is a background and I want to have other stuff going on in front of it, I don't want to draw every brick and every tile because that's going to have a lot of visual weight. It's going to attract the viewer's eye and it's going to distract from whatever's going on in front of it. So in those cases, I would use representative form to draw some of the bricks and some of the tiles and let the viewer's brain fill in the rest that those should be there. So another representative strategy is representative contours. So just like you can describe a form with a contour, you can or edges with contours when we're describing form, you can use some of the contours to describe more edges than or to describe sorry, use contours to describe some of the edges and leave other edges up to the viewer's imagination. So, for example, if I want to draw a rock, I'm going to take this box and I want to make it a rock, give it rock texture. I could use the outside contours and give them a little bit of wave to them that suggests that there is a rock texture underneath, that these lines are wrapping around the uneven texture of a rock. But when I do this, it's important that I still consider that these representative contours still look like the real contours that I would see if I was looking at that rock. Even though I'm not using all of them, I want the ones that I use to still be accurate. Instead, in this one to the right, I wasn't really thinking about the contours as wrapping around actual surfaces and just kind of doing like a wiggly thing. Hello. Goodbye. Just doing like a wiggly thing that it's like, oh, wiggle texture. But when you do that, it just ends up looking wiggly. It doesn't look textured and it kind of undermines the form. Same thing if I'm doing contours within the silhouette. So those contours are still wrapping around edges that I would see. They're not just like wiggly, hey, texture is here contours. So an example of representative contours from this painting by Ivan Shishkin. We're going to look at a few Ivan Shishkin paintings today because he does texture extremely well. Phenomenal landscape painter. So if we look at the field of rye here, we don't see every individual blade or stalk of the rye because that would be insane. But some of the stalks are visible, like these little lines here, and that's enough for our mind to fill in that the rest of that rye is there, even though we don't see even though we don't see every individual stalk. So some of the edges of the stalk represent the rest of the stalk that we don't see. Makes sense so far?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, yeah.
So the next representative strategy is shape, and it's very similar to representative contour, just with shapes. So instead of trying to draw every shape for every leaf of this bush, I'm using larger shapes that represent the smaller shapes. And these strategies kind of overlap because the lines at the edge of these shapes could be their representative contours. So even though I didn't draw every leaf, you still get a sense of the leaves from just the shapes alone. In this painting by Gretchen Woodward, I think, can't remember the last name, um, the fur uses representative shapes. So there's some shapes for the fur, for tufts of fur, that hint at other shapes for hint of other tufts of fur that you don't see. Or like on the top here, there's these individual shapes of tufts of fur, but there would be others that you know are there, but you don't see them because you don't see every individual hair when you're looking at a fur coat. So the next strategy is value variation. So this goes back to what I was talking about earlier, how value reveals the orientation of the surface. Because on a smooth surface, as it's getting hit by light, its surface is gradually transitioning from facing the light to facing away from the light. That gradual transition is represented by a gradual transition in value. So it gets darker and lighter in a smooth gradient. If instead the surface is bumpy or like has a bunch of ridges, that transition between light and dark is going to be interrupted. So like this surface here is going to be brighter than this surface here, even though it's closer to the shadow because of the texture. So that variation in surface texture I can represent with variation in value. And this is where using texture brushes can really help. So for example, this cylinder is perfectly smooth. So my transition between light and dark is also going to be smooth, even gradient. This one to the right, I wanted to give it a texture of like a hammered metal kind of thing. So it's still cylindrical, but that cylinder is broken up into some flat planes. So I used shapes of value that represent those flat planes, and those different values cause variation in the gradient. Instead of it being smooth, it is broken up into these shapes that interrupt the gradient. Same thing for this one, that I'm using like a brushed metal texture. So there are those like ridges that come with brushed metal, and those are variations. Those ridges are variations in the value. Same thing with these little scratches that are here. So these are dark and light. So they're dark because part of the scratch is going to be in shadow, and part of the scratch is going to be light if the light catches the edge. So those also break up the value transition. Finally, for this one, I wanted more of like a bumpy kind of feel. So there's a bunch of little dots of value that interrupt that transition. And this is most noticeable at the points where the light curves into the shadow. That's where you really want to focus that texture to create that feeling that the surface is rough or smooth. So, for example, with this rock, if it were smooth, the difference in value would change gradually and smoothly. If it's rough, I have a bunch of interruptions, like dark parts in the lighter area, lighter parts in the darker area, that make it look more textured. Another way we can use value is with specular highlights. So these are the like hard edge highlights that you see when a surface is shiny. and shiny surfaces are just about always smooth, or wet, or smooth and wet. So just adding that little highlight, it completely changes the texture. Even though the sphere is exactly the same in every other way, it feels like a different texture on the right just because of that highlight. It looks like it's shiny. It looks like it's smoother. Where the other one is, it's still smooth, but like kind of a matte smooth, like a baseball. And you can see this in action in this painting by Soroyo, where you have these highlight shapes on the skin that reveal that the texture is wet and it's reflecting light, so it's shiny. So that is value variation. You can also do variation in color to suggest texture. This one is a little less common, and usually you'd want to combine this with value variation as well. So this is where the surface is made up of different material, or it has different surface properties that cause the texture. Like rust, for example. Rust has a different surface property than the unrusted metal that it's cutting into. So I would vary the color to represent that variation in the surface, like the orange for the rust, the blue for the metal, and the like kind of yellow in between the two of them. Um, and then this painting, I don't remember the artist for this one, but this is an example where you have both value variation and color variation that suggests texture. So if you look closely at the rocks, there's little shapes of value that suggest that the rock is rough and bumpy. And then if you look at the wall here, there's these like streaks of color that suggest that there's a different material property of that brick. Like maybe it's gotten some kind of mold growing on it, or it's differently weathered than the brick. Like the top of the brick has worn off, and the inside of the brick is a different color, different surface properties. Um, and then finally, in general, you're not going to just use one of these strategies. You're going to kind of combine them. You can use just one strategy, but these are like they're overall strategies rather than like a specific way to do things. So in this, going back to the reptile, I'm using a little bit of everything. Like there's some of these scales are really rendered as forms, like the bigger ones, like down here and up. Excuse me, up here. Some of them are there's just a few lines that suggest the form, so those would be representative contours. Others are representative shapes, like these little bumps up here. Not really much of value variation in this case. Or I guess, yeah, maybe like down here, these little bumps in the value. But the idea is that these strategies are they're like general strategies rather than like a specific way to handle texture. Because there's lots and lots of textures, and there's lots and lots of ways that you could describe texture. Like depending on the your style, like what you want to do with the piece compositionally. If you're doing it with paint or you're doing it with like pen and ink, you're going to want to describe the texture differently. So with paint, you might rely more on value variation and representative shapes, whereas with pen and ink, you might rely more on representative contour. Uh, and depends on what texture you want to create as well. So I've been talking for a while. Let me take a breath and give you guys a chance to add any thoughts or questions before I keep going. Okay. Well, I'll just keep going then. So the next thing I want to talk about is texture and form. So because texture is smaller forms that are on the surface of larger forms, it's important that we keep an eye on the larger forms as well and keep those in mind. The smaller forms of the texture should follow the larger form of the object that they're on. Otherwise, it can end up being kind of flat. So, for example, with the this feathered cylinder, the example on the left, I made the angle of the feathers match the angle of the cylinder underneath, whereas with the cylinder on the right, the angle of the feathers does not change despite the angle of the cylinder changing, and as a result, it looks flat, especially if you cover the cylinder. Then you'd have no idea that there's a cylinder there at all. Whereas with the other one, if I cover that cylinder, you can still see the texture changing direction and revealing the form underneath. Um, so one more thing when it comes to texture is to think about scale and distance as well. Texture has a big impact on. You're a good teacher, sir. Thank you very much. Appreciate that, Logan. Texture has a big impact on how we perceive depth because things that are further away we'll see as having less texture. Um, this can go wrong really quickly if you don't do this. It kind of flattens depth. I'll show an example of that in a bit. So the tree that's closest, because it's right up close and we can see all the texture, I went in and I did all of the details on this bark. Just full on textured that bark. For the leaves, I'm using representative forms, but still, like there's a lot of definition in these leaves. Um, when I get a little further away, now I'm leaving more of it to the viewer's imagination. I'm putting in less texture detail. So representative contours for like bigger shapes of leaves instead of showing any individual leaf. Representative contours for like larger shapes in the bark instead of individual scales in the bark. And then when I get even further away, I'm using only a few contours for like big areas of leaves and no texture at all on the tree bark. It's too small, can't see it at that range. Um, but another cool thing that happens with texture and scale is that because I assume as the viewer, I assume that these trees are all the same or at least similar. I'm going to assume that the tree in the back has the same texture as the trees in the middle ground and foreground. And my mind even kind of fills them in. Like I perceive this tree as having bark, even though there's no visual evidence for it. So here's what I mean by how you use this to enforce depth. So in this example, this is similar to how I've been explaining it, where in the foreground you have the most texture, and then in the middle ground you have less texture, and then in the background you have even less texture. And because of this, it makes it look like it's going back in space. If instead I used full texture everywhere, it looks a lot flatter. Would you agree?
I would say it looks
I
pretty
agree.
like complex to see.
It looks complex
A
to
lot of information.
see. Yeah, it's an overload of information. Yeah, because like you can see more texture in the same amount of visual space further in the distance if you really look for it, because you're seeing like more of the surface. But if you draw all that, like, but normally you don't see that texture because you're not looking for it. We don't see things that we're not looking for to some extent. Um, so if you draw all of that texture, it looks really strange. There's like more texture in the background and less in the front, which works against depth and makes it look flat. I also think it looks pretty bad compositionally as well, because it's like Bax said, an overload of texture, an overload of information. Um, so, for example of this, we're going to go back to Shishkin here. So, in the foreground of this painting, there's individual leaves. Like if we look at these, I think they're dandelions or whatever these plants are, you can see individual leaves in the painting. When we go a bit further back, there's just representative shapes for those leaves in the undergrowth. Same thing with the bark. We see like individual contours. It's not full on every detail of the bark like in my drawing, but it's still a lot of the bark is represented. If we go back, those contours aren't there so much, and it's just kind of shapes. We go all the way back here. There's no bark texture at all. It's just the overall form of the tree. Same thing up here with the leaves, where the leaves are like bunches of leaves still, but they're kind of suggested a little bit. Then when we get into the distance, it's just shapes for large areas of leaves. Then again, in this one, also Shishkin, same thing. In the this one's a little harder to see because the resolution's not as good. But like in the foreground, there's individual leaves, and then as we get further back, it's just shapes, and then go even further back, you can't even see individual plants. It's just green. Um, so another important thing about texture, this is more detail in general, but texture is a part of that, is that like we saw with those ones going back in space, texture in detail has visual weight, so it draws the eye, and you can use this intentionally. So in this painting by Ilya Repin, all of the detail is in the center. So if you look at this guy's coat here, very little detail. But this guy's coat here, there's a lot more detail, especially in the face. Like this guy's face is individual wrinkles. You can kind of see the individual tufts of this guy's hair. Whereas when we get further out, like this guy, he's more of shapes. This dude can't even see his eyes. And what that does is that that visual weight, it draws the eye into the center, especially this guy right here with the contrast, and he's writing, which is important for the story of this painting. But I'm not going to get into it because this isn't a composition lecture. Just a general note on how texture does create visual weight. So yeah, that's the theory I have for tonight. Does anybody have any questions about texture or anything?
So about that last painting, basically, there's a lot of texture in the center, and then everything else was simple shapes just surrounding the texture, right?
Right. There's less texture the further from that focal point you get. Less texture, less detail. And it's absolutely intentional.
All right.
So if you want to focus on one specific point of the drawing, you apply more depth, more information in that. And the things you don't really want to focus on, just basic shapes, just simplify.
In general, yes. That's one aspect of visual weight. There's a whole bunch more, and they all interact in unpredictable, well, not unpredictable, but like they interact in ways that you don't really know what it's going to be like until you see it. So I can't I can't give you like a one size fits all rule for that, but in general, areas that have more detail will have more visual weight and draw the eye than areas that have less texture. So what you said is accurate. It's just it's more complicated than that. It's part of a whole package. Does that make sense?
It does, it does.
Cool. Okay, so we got 20 minutes left. Why don't I do a demo? Um, Give me a subject with texture, and I'll see if I can do it. I did one of these earlier in the lecture this morning, and I didn't really get it done in 20 minutes, but I think I got enough that you got the idea of how I would do it. So, does anybody have a subject matter that, like a textured subject? Ideally, something that you've been interested in yourself. And I'll see.
Does a heart count?
Uh, no, because I'm
It
not
does
gonna.
have texture, right?
Yeah, but I'm not gonna be able to find a like a reference of that. Um,
Oh,
Something I can find reference of.
A
how
super
about
furry animal.
Sorry, you both talked at the same time. I didn't get either of you.
A super furry animal.
Yeah, that's a good one. Like a furry animal. Um, okay, I'm
Like
gonna.
a paw or a tail or something.
Sorry, say that again.
I mean, the whole animal, the whole dog, or just like the tail or the paw.
Well, I'm not gonna be able to draw the whole animal, but I will kind of like give a general idea of how I would do the fur, how I'd handle the fur texture at least. So I got this bear, and the fur texture is really clear in this photo, which is why I chose it. So there's lots of ways I could do this. I could do, if I was doing a line drawing, I could do representative contour. If I was doing this as a painting, I could do representative shape. Um, why don't I did representative shape and in like value variation in my last lecture. So this time, why don't I do the like a line drawing style, like how I would handle him with representative contour. So first I'm gonna like just kind of draw in the general shapes of the bear. Just to like starting with the texture is kind of crazy. I don't. It's gonna end up looking really wonky. It might end up looking wonky anyway, just 'cause I'm kind of doing this fast. And I'm not a like expert on bear anatomy, but I'm gonna just kind of like get a general sense of this guy. Um, his nose needs to be a bit longer. I would imagine he's got such skinny legs. Such a big, strong bear. Anyway, so there's my gesture, and I like. There's so many lines here that if I tried to draw them all, I would go nuts. So I'm gonna start by using representative contour at the edges. So like his furry ears. Let me use a smaller brush for this. A little bit of fur there. Like a little bit of, some parts are bushier than others, like a little bit of fur on the forehead. But then back here, where it's very bushy, I'm gonna do a bunch of fur texture. His like bushy back thing. Or this space behind the ear is very very bushy. Bottom of his chin, there's those like individual hairs that are showing up. And I'll contrast this with areas that are less furry, where I'm just gonna kind of draw it straight. And then those furry brows. But his forehead, I'll keep that smoother because it's not that furry. Big differences in form, like the side of his face like this is like seems like a good place for some fur. Or like there looks like there's a little bit of overlap where the fur of the neck area goes over the fur of the arm. So I'll make sure I get that in there. And then where I see fur, I want to, and I can add those contours like down here on the bottom of his neck. I really want to show that fur because that's going to fill in with the rest, and then I can leave other places smoother. I like the elbow here. And yeah, I think he's already looking pretty furry. Bottom edge, like I like those parts where the fur comes down. I think that works really well for the texture. But I probably don't want to just put fur on the edge. On the edges, I want to put some like within the silhouette too. And where I put that is very much a creative decision that I'm going to base not only on the texture, but also on like the composition, the forms underneath, that kind of thing, to like define the forms of the bear. So the head, the way the head is separating from the body, that's something that I want to make sure is clear. So I can do that with some representative contours that also serve to capture the darker value that's here on the bottom of the face. And maybe I'll put some up here as well. So that's too much, that dark. But I'm actually going to use some representative shapes here too. For like the dark shapes in the shadow. Maybe up here as well. a lot of the times it's really just experimentation. Like I don't know if this is going to look good until I try it and I see if it does or not. And I'm not sure how much I actually like those representative shapes. I think I might need to come back to it because I'm going to try some more down here. If I only put them in one place, it's going to look weird. But if I do a bunch of them, it might balance out. So at this point, I'm starting to settle on kind of using the fur texture as a bit as hatching as well. So I'll use those dark representative shapes, where I want the dark values to be, and then use a little bit less fur texture where I want it to be brighter. No, I don't like those. Too dark. So yeah, this is hopefully this demo clarified what I'm going for a little bit. I think I'm getting kind of happy with this bear. I think he looks furry, but I'm not drawing every hair. Any more thoughts, questions? Gonna wrap pretty soon.
Not really a question, but I'll start to get this in consideration when I look at any drawing to see the texture, to see the depth of each stroke. That's a good thing to learn actually. Pretty good thing to learn.
Nice. Yeah, I'm glad this is useful.
How would you capture the highlights on this thing? Because I see a little bit of highlights on the original reference, right? And like because the bear is like dipped in water, right?
Right.
So I can understand why it's droopy down on the of the right arm of the bear, right?
Yeah. So I don't know that I would add highlights if I'm doing this with just like pen and ink kind of style. What I could do is I could go through and add a lighter color, like a color that's lighter than the page. This can be cool sometimes, but it has a lot of visual weight, so you gotta be careful with where you use it. I kind of like that though. So yeah, that was a
That
good
looks cool.
that was a good question.
Yeah, because gray, white, and black go together well.
Oh yeah, yeah. This is why I always use a gray canvas. I don't work on white because it gives me the option. Because yeah, I'm not just thinking about texture at this point. I'm also thinking about composition, like where I put those dark darks in order to keep it interesting. Okay, so I'm gonna keep drawing, but I will start to wrap. Um, so first of all, I'm gonna say this a few times, but thanks for coming out. It would not be much point in me doing those if no one showed up, so I appreciate that. Um, I do these every Wednesday at 7 Pacific Standard Time and 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. That was about an hour ago. And 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Um, I do these on YouTube, but I also do them on my Discord. So if you're watching this on YouTube, either now or later on, actually now is too late, but if you're watching these on YouTube later on and you want to be at the next one and talk to me on the mic, then join the Discord. I put a link in the description. Um, I all the information I covered today is in my free book that you can download at imaginativedrawing.com. Um, I also you can also book me for one-on-one mentorship if you want one-on-one teaching where I like really go through your goals and your how you work. Like it's just personalized feedback, really focusing on you and what matters and what skills you need specifically, your work specifically, your goals specifically to get you better. Um, what is new this week is I released a fundamentals drawing course that is completely free that I'm very excited about. And it's not like so many of the courses on the internet where it's just a series of videos. This one is this one has like assignments and a suggested schedule and stuff like that. So when you learn to make art by making art, not by watching videos and stuff. So the course is built with that in mind. So you'll actually be doing stuff the whole time, and that will lead to improvement. Not only that, but it's designed to give you structure. So a lot of self-taught artists struggle because they don't know how to study or they don't know what to study. So the course is a solution for that. That I built as much as I can in a free course with the structure that I use in my real life courses. So there's theory, there's exercises to put the theory into practice, and then there's assignments to test how well, oh, that white doesn't look good there, to test how well you're understanding the theory and to make drawings that you would not be able to have made before you learned the theory. So hopefully I get a few of you to go try that out. It's there's a link for that in the description as well, and you can also find out more about that on my Discord. I'll throw it out to you guys one more time before I wrap, if you guys have anything to say. All right, cool. Well, thanks again for coming out, and it's been fun. Next class, I will be covering the course and how to study, a bit about how to study in general. So hopefully I'll see you there or catch you on the Discord. Night, everybody.
That
Night night.